Now Ronna McDaniel is in talks with my lawyer, the brilliant Brian Friedman, who is amazing and who you definitely want on your side if you're in a legal scrap, to go after NBC because they booted her before even allowing her to fulfill her contract. And according to Politico, she is exploring potential, not just breach of contract, but defamation claims against them and hostile work environment claims, which is interesting given that, those are her colleagues who engaged in a massive pile-on and bullying attempt to get her right out the door, and it worked. And there was a headline on Mediaite the other day, which is a media website covering events in media, saying Ronna McDaniel will never work in media again, something to that effect, that she's done. Not only is she fired from NBC, she'll never get another contributor deal because of what happened to her with those colleagues and those clips. And the left-wing media headline is, she's going to get how many, if you calculate it out by the minute, she was getting $300,000 annually. And so that's $600,000 that they owe her. She did a not 20-minute interview. So it basically is going to cost NBC more than $30,000 a minute or $500 per second. And there's an eye roll, like she doesn't deserve it. But what do you make as a former recovering lawyer, I should say, yourself, of these potential claims by Ronna McDaniel against NBC?
I mean, the irony of this from the beginning is that Ronna McDaniel is not like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Carrie Lake or some very fanatical Trump supporter. Trump world can't stand Ronna McDaniel. I mean, that's a big part of why she's no longer the head of the RNC. She's like the most tepid and like cursory kind of Republican who has to sort of support Donald Trump now that he's the nominee and was a prior president. Like, she's as moderate and tepid in that role as it gets.
Plus, she's kind of sweet. She's not like easy to hate. She's a sweet woman.
She's Mitt Romney's niece. She's like, very like well-liked personally. No, I've never heard like a bad word about her as a person. Like, I've heard a bad word about her politics from Trump supporters primarily. And the fact that they turned her into this kind of extremist who, I mean, you just showed some of the people that NBC employs in its sacred halls. You have like Joy Reid, who, let us remember, invented a complex, complete lie that she turned over to the FBI, claiming that there was a hacker who wrote her bigoted blog posts that were discovered 10 years ago. No one cared that she wrote bigoted blog posts from 10 years ago. The issue is that she lied and said, I didn't write these. I think it was a hacker and the FBI is investigating. It was a complete fabrication, like a crazy conspiracy theory. They promoted her after that. They have George Bush and Dick Cheney's press secretary or communications director, Nicole Wallace, who, from a liberal perspective, said a lot of things that would put people off limits, including defending the Iraq War and torture and Guantanamo and all sorts of things like that. You have Jen Psaki, who like 5 seconds ago was the press secretary for Joe Biden, who really says and does the same exact thing now on NBC. So to turn Ronna McDaniel into this kind of like enemy of democracy, this like extremist who's so far beyond the pale of, anything that any news organization could be associated with, it definitely, had a did serious damage to her reputation. Whether, as well as anyone, Megyn, that when you're a public figure, which she is, defamation is very difficult because you have a lot of leeway even to say false things about public figures if they're in the realm of opinion, or even if you're wrong, if you're not intending to destroy the person. But clearly there's a lot of contractual issues. I'm sure NBC is going to end up paying her money. But I do kind of think that what they did with her reputation, the way they all got together and trashed it on air in front of millions of people, is something that if I were her lawyer, and you're right, she has one of the best, I'm sure they're exploring a lot of theories about that as well.
Mm-hmm. I would definitely be suing for more than the $600,000. This is what these companies do, right? I mean, trust me, NBC has a history of this, but they're not the only ones. Where it's not enough to separate from you, they try to absolutely ruin you on your way out the door. They try to make you unemployable by anyone else. because they're vicious, mean assholes. That's why. And it's a different crew running NBC than, the people I knew when I was there. But these people threw her under the bus and then repeatedly backed over her time and time again. And to the point where I didn't know this. I learned this in the political piece. But Kristen Welker, who is now the host of Meet the Press, began her interview of Ronna McDaniel for that 20-minute interview by saying, I want to make clear this was booked when you were just the former head of the RNC. I did not know that you were going to be an NBC News contributor, and I had nothing to do with your hiring. And then, of course, Chuck Todd came on and was like, oh, you've been put in a terrible position by our bosses. They owe you an apology. But Politico reports that actually the truth is Kristen Welker did have something to do with the hiring of Ronna McDaniel, that she had met with her privately along with another executive, Carrie Budoff Brown, Senior Vice President of Politics, in mid-February, which was a few days after Budoff Brown initially reached out to McDaniel's team to gauge her interest in joining as a paid contributor, and that potential role as a paid NBC News contributor with a contract was brought up in that meeting. But now Kristen Welker, I had nothing to do with it. Oh, who? And the head of MSNBC too. She came out, Rashida Jones, she was like, don't worry, she'll never be on MSNBC. She played a pivotal role in getting Ronna McDaniel's hired too. So the executives and the talent are lying about their role in hiring this woman. And then as soon as she gets there, in Rashida Jones's case anyway, and in Kristen Welker's, sitting across from Chuck Todd, they let the mob kill her. I mean, emerge with her jugular, all while sitting there playing holier than thou.
Yeah, I mean, look, I have two views on this. So from the perspective of what was done to Ronna McDaniel, I mean, it is so outrageous. They didn't even give her the chance. I think what would have happened was, and you kind of saw this in the Meet the Press interview, when she was asked about some of the claims that liberal media personalities find offensive, like Chuck Todd and Kristen Welker, she was kind of distancing herself from those, especially stuff about the 2020 election, saying, well, look, as of the RNC chair, there were things that I kind of had to say. It was part of my job. And now that I'm here and free from that, I'm not necessarily going to endorse all those same claims. So they didn't even give her a chance to kind of say what it is that she thinks now that she's in a different role, because I don't think they recognize that, because Jen Psaki, as I said, didn't do that at all. Like, there's nothing that she's doing now or saying now that wouldn't fit perfectly when she was the Biden White House spokesperson. But that's the other thing, is looking at it as kind of a citizen or as a journalist or a consumer of these news, or how I'm glad that NBC did this, because what it really showed is that not just MSNBC, but NBC is an ideological actor, that they have an agenda to which they're captive. It's kind of like what we just were saying about Jimmy Fallon, that these institutions that were supposed to be politically neutral and nonpartisan and non-ideological are in fact everything, the opposite of what they claim to be. And the more that becomes manifest and evident, I think the better off it is. It's going to make like half the country or more, again, realize that there's no place for their views or their beliefs or people like them at a major network like NBC.
These people have learned nothing from 16 forward. They've learned nothing. There are common sense reasons gold is pushing to all-time highs right now. The cost of goods continues to rise, for one. The national debt continues to skyrocket, too, now above $34 trillion. It's hard to even fathom, causing many to worry when this house of cards is going to come crashing down. And then there's our presidential election, and this year, that's going to have massive implications on the future of this country. All of this can add up to instability and uncertainty, and that is why many Americans are turning to Birch Gold Group. Have you diversified your savings yet? One option you could consider is to secure a portion of your savings with gold from Birch Gold. Text MK to 989898 and get your free info kit. You'll learn how to convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in gold without costing you anything. Birch Gold has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau and thousands of happy customers. Text MK to 989898 to claim your free info kit and learn how you might protect your savings from uncertainty today. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.